The slap came before Amara could finish her sentence. Gasps. Her baby wailed louder, the sting of the flight attendant's hand still burning across her cheek. "I'll have you removed," the woman snapped, glaring down. "This is first class, not a daycare." Amara didn't cry. She didn't shout. She reached into her diaper bag, pulled out her phone, and dialed one number. "Ma'am, we've asked you to keep your child quiet," the flight attendant snapped, her words brittle and sharp like glass underfoot. She was tall, blonde, with a tight bun and tighter smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. "I'm trying," Amara said, her voice low, controlled. "He's just tired in." "I said quiet," the attendant barked. And then, before Amara could finish her sentence, the slap came. A crisp, open-handed strike across Amara's cheek, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the stunned cabin. Gasps, murmurs, but no outrage. "Security will remove you if you don't cooperate," the attendant hissed, still towering over her. "This is first class, not a daycare." Amara's hand slowly rose to her cheek, her eyes wide with disbelief, but not surprise. Her voice shook as she responded, "Did you just?" "She's being disruptive," a passenger muttered from the aisle seat behind her. "Some people think money can buy them anything," another woman added, folding her arms. The pilot's voice chimed in over the intercom, calm, clipped. "Cabin crew, prepare for possible removal of a disruptive passenger." A second attendant came forward, then a third. One whispered into a phone. A uniformed man, the air marshal, stood in the galley doorway, eyeing Amara warily. She held her baby tighter, whispering calming words into his curls. And then, with a kind of eerie grace, Amara reached into her designer diaper bag and pulled out her phone. "Who are you calling?" The first attendant sneered. Amara didn't answer. She tapped a single contact and held the phone out in front of her. "Speaker, please," she said calmly. The line rang once, twice. Then, "Hey, babe," came a warm, confident male voice. "You boarding yet?" Amara's voice was still steady, still low, but it sliced through the silence like steel. "Hi, love. I'm already on the plane. But your staff just slapped me in front of everyone." A beat of silence. Then, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "I'm sorry, what?" Mouths dropped. The air grew thick, and Amara leaned back in her seat, as if reclaiming the very space they tried to take from her. "Captain James L. Brooks," she said, eyes locked with the flight attendant. "My husband, CEO of this airline." You could hear a pin drop. The smug expression drained from the flight attendant's face so fast it left her lips trembling. One of the other attendants took a half-step back, suddenly unsure where to look. The air marshal's hand, which had hovered near his radio, slowly lowered. "Excuse me." The captain's voice crackled through the speakerphone, now steely and cold. "Put me on with the lead flight attendant. Right now." Amara didn't blink. "She's right here," she said, raising the phone slightly, her cheeks still glowing red. The attendant hesitated, then slowly brought the phone to her ear. "This is Karen Morrison, lead attendant. Sir, I can assure you, you laid hands on my wife." The captain's voice was no longer warm. "You put your hand on her face? Are you out of your damn mind?" "I didn't realize she was being disruptive. She's my wife, Karen, with our son, on a plane I own. I want your entire cabin report transmitted to HQ. Now, and tell the crew not to touch her again unless they want to be personally named in a federal assault case." Karen's eyes darted around, desperate for support, but none came. The other crew members froze. One of them whispered, "Wait, her husband is the..." "He's James L. Brooks," Amara repeated for the cabin. "Founder, CEO, pilot, veteran, the man who signs your checks." The air marshal cleared his throat, stepped forward, and with a practiced military nod said, "Ma'am, my apologies. Please let me know if there's anything you need." He turned to the attendants. "Stand down. Immediately." In the seats around her, the passengers, who moments ago called her entitled and disruptive, now sat stone still, many of them avoiding her gaze, others suddenly fascinated by the safety manual in their lap. But one man, middle-aged, blazer, gold watch, tried to recover. Listen, this was all just a misunderstanding, he said, his voice oily with cowardice. No need to make a scene. Amara turned to him, baby now sleeping against her chest. You didn't mind a scene when you assumed I didn't belong here. He looked down. The captain's voice came through the speaker again, quieter now, but deliberate. I'll be on the tarmac when you land. And Karen, don't bother putting on that uniform again. Karen's hand dropped. Her face crumpled, and Amara leaned back in her seat, kissed her son's forehead, and said softly, Now, let's enjoy the flight. By the time the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, the cabin was humming again, but this time with an entirely different energy. No more side-eyes. No more mutters about entitlement. Now, it was hushed apologies and awkward glances. The man across the aisle shifted uncomfortably in his seat, pretending to read a magazine he hadn't flipped once. The woman who had scoffed earlier now fidgeted with her necklace, refusing to meet Amara's eyes. But the silence didn't mean peace. Phones began to appear, quietly, subtly. Screens lit up beneath tray tables and behind pursed lips. Fingers danced across screens as passengers typed out versions of the event to friends, group chats, and social media feeds. Some were already spinning their roles into innocence. Crazy thing just happened on my flight. Turns out the crying baby's mom is married to the airline CEO. That flight attendant is done. I mean, who slaps someone in first class? Y'all, I witnessed the most awkward power shift of my life. Flight crew huddled in the galley like students caught cheating, whispering under their breath. The junior attendant, a young Latino woman who had said nothing during the altercation, finally broke the silence between them. You really slapped her? She asked Karen in a stunned whisper. I didn't know who she was, Karen hissed back. Why should that matter? The junior snapped. You still hit her. Karen didn't answer. Back in her seat, Amara scrolled her phone with one hand, the other gently rocking her now sleeping son. She didn't post anything, didn't rage, but she saw the buzz beginning to ripple outward. Someone in row 2 had uploaded a blurry photo of the confrontation. It was already on Twitter. Comments were multiplying. Why does it always come down to people assuming we don't belong? She muttered under her breath. The woman beside her, a silent passenger in her early 50s, pale with silver hair, turned slowly and said, For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Amara looked at her, gauging the sincerity. The woman didn't flinch. It's not enough, Amara said softly, but I appreciate you saying it. From the cockpit, a new voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer. We want to apologize for any disruption earlier in the flight. We take the safety and dignity of our passengers seriously. That was it. No names, no details, but the tone had changed. Everyone felt it. Amara wasn't just a woman with a baby anymore. She was a mirror, held up to the assumptions every person on that plane had made. And the reflection was ugly. As the plane began its slow descent, a chill settled over first class, one not from altitude, but from realization. Karen sat stiffly in the jump seat, hands clenched into fists in her lap. Her earpiece buzzed with chatter from the cockpit crew. She could feel the weight of every second dragging her closer to the tarmac, and the man waiting for her there. Passengers began to buckle their seat belts, but their eyes weren't on the safety card or the window. They were on Amara. She hadn't spoken since the phone call, hadn't demanded anything. No tantrum, no theatrics. She simply sat there, regal and composed, as if daring the universe to test her again. That silence did more damage than shouting ever could. The junior attendant approached, crouching beside Amara's seat. Ma'am, she said softly, voice laced with shame, I'm really sorry for not stepping in. I didn't agree with what happened. I just froze. Amara studied her face. What's your name? Yasmin. Amara nodded. Thank you for saying something, Yasmin. When it matters most, silence is a choice too. Yasmin's eyes watered. She nodded and stood, retreating with quiet dignity. The man in the blazer, the same one who'd called her entitled, now leaned across the aisle. If there's anything I can do. Amara turned toward him, her expression cool but clear. There was. But you chose comfort over courage. He sank back into his seat. As the wheels touched down, the entire cabin braced, not for landing, but for confrontation. People peered between the seats, angling to see out the window. And there he was, James Brooks, CEO, decorated pilot, black man in a tailored charcoal suit and aviators, standing on the tarmac like a thunderstorm in human form. His presence alone made the plane seem suddenly too small. The jet bridge extended. The door clicked. Karen stood, frozen. Crew, doors to arrival and cross-check, the captain called. But no one moved to open the cabin door. Because they all knew, what came next wasn't routine. It was reckoning. The metallic hiss of the cabin door unlocking sliced through the tense silence. Every head turned. Yasmin was the one who moved first. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlatched the lever and opened the door. Warm air rushed in from the jet bridge, but it wasn't the heat that raised the temperature. It was the man standing just outside. James Brooks stepped in, calm and deliberate. He didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. The gold captain's wings on his lapel gleamed under the fluorescent light, and every crew member on board stiffened as though they'd seen a ghost. James scanned the cabin. His eyes found Amara instantly, her swollen cheek, the baby in her lap, the way she held herself with dignity amidst disaster. He gave a small nod, the kind that said, "I see you. I've got this." Then, slowly, his gaze shifted to Karen. "Flight Attendant Morrison," he said, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "Step forward." Karen's throat bobbed. She took a shaky step, then another. Her voice came out brittle. "Sir, He raised a hand. "No, it wasn't a request. It was a verdict. I've watched the footage from the onboard cameras," he said, turning slightly so that the passengers could hear. "I've listened to the audio. I know everything that happened. Every word you said, every assumption you made." Karen looked around the cabin, perhaps hoping someone might come to her defense. No one moved. "You struck a passenger. You escalated a situation you created. And you did it all under the assumption that she didn't belong here." James paused. "You thought no one would care." Karen's eyes welled, but still, no apology. James stepped forward, his tone unwavering. "You're hereby relieved of duty. Permanently. You will not fly for this airline again." There was a collective inhale across the cabin. Karen's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "But I didn't know who she was." James cut her off with a quiet finality that chilled the air. "And that's exactly the problem." He turned to Yasmin. "You did the right thing by apologizing. That takes more courage than following orders." Yasmin nodded, lips trembling. James extended a hand to Amara, who stood slowly, cradling their son. Her face was unreadable, regal in its restraint. As they stepped into the jet bridge together, the passengers parted like the Red Sea. Not one dared to meet her eyes. It wasn't just a walk off a plane. It was a walk through shame, silence, and every unspoken bias that had been weaponized against her. But now, the reckoning had a face, and it wasn't hers. The moment James and Amara stepped off the plane, a team of corporate security, HR representatives, and PR liaisons was already waiting on the tarmac. Phones rang in belt clips. Suits murmured into headsets. One assistant was frantically swiping through a growing flurry of tagged posts online. Passengers had wasted no time uploading shaky videos and threads recounting the scene. The story was already viral. "Do we go with a holding statement?" a PR manager whispered. James didn't answer. He guided Amara into the waiting lounge set aside for crew rest, now completely cleared out. Plush chairs, dimmed lighting, silence. Amara sat down, still rocking the baby gently. The redness in her cheek was beginning to fade, but the imprint of the moment lingered. She looked at James, her voice steady. "I'm okay." James crouched in front of her, his hands gently covering hers. "You shouldn't have to be." Outside the room, the company's top executives had arrived. Legal, operations, flight safety. They all waited, trying to look useful, trying to avoid being next in the line of fire. James finally stood, opened the door, and stepped into the hallway. He didn't raise his voice, but it carried like thunder. Damage control doesn't start with spin. It starts with accountability. The room fell silent. I want full statements from every member of that crew. I want the passenger manifest flagged for contact. And I want our in-flight protocol reviewed today. Not next week. Not next quarter. Now. The VP of Operations cleared his throat. Should we, suspend Karen Morrison pending investigation? James turned to him. She's already fired. There is no pending. She hit a passenger. But she says she didn't know who Amara was. James's voice dropped to a growl. She didn't need to. Silence. The legal officer finally spoke up, cautious. James, this is going to hit the press within the hour. We'll need to prepare a statement. We're not writing a statement, James replied. We're writing a confession. We failed. My crew failed. And the world's going to see what happens when they do. He paused. But they're also going to see what happens when we make it right. Back in the lounge, Amara stared out the window at the tarmac, her baby now asleep in her arms. And outside, the machine that had tried to dehumanize her was shifting gears, because this time, it had picked the wrong target. By the time the airport Wi-Fi stabilized, the internet had already erupted. A 43-second clip from a passenger in row 3C, shaky, vertical, but damning, was circulating across Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit. The moment the slap landed, the way Amara's head turned from the force, the cold silence that followed, and then the phone call and the revelation. This black woman got slapped in first class for her baby crying. And turns out, she's married to the guy who OWNS the airline. Hashtag discrimination in the skies. Within an hour, hashtag first class face and hashtag CEO wife trended globally. The reactions came fast and sharp. Imagine slapping the CEO's wife. In first class. No amount of turbulence justifies laying hands on a mother. Period. That attendant's career took off and landed in the same flight. But beyond the memes and outrage, deeper conversations were forming. Commentators, activists, and journalists began digging. Articles sprouted up. When first class still isn't enough. The racial gatekeeping of luxury spaces. Corporate diversity, surface PR, or structural change. Amara's face wasn't just in the spotlight. It was at the center of a cultural reckoning. In the lounge, she scrolled through a feed full of her own trauma refracted through other people's narratives. Some sympathetic, some exploitative. James returned with a team of corporate staff, trailing him like anxious shadows. They want you to do a press conference, he said, his jaw tight. Amara looked up, her expression unreadable. To apologize for being assaulted? To tell your side. Before someone else tells it for you. She looked down at her son, still sleeping. I don't want to be a spectacle. You're not, James said. You're a standard. He sat beside her, letting the moment settle. You could change policy, training, culture. Amara exhaled slowly. I came here to fly, not to fix your airline. He nodded. I'll fix the airline. But you being seen? That's already changing everything. Across the terminal, someone recognized her. A young black girl, maybe 14, standing beside her mother. She waved shyly, her eyes wide with awe. Amara smiled gently and waved back. The girl beamed. Amara looked at James. Fine, I'll speak, but on my terms. And just like that, the woman who was told she didn't belong in first class was about to redefine what first class meant for everyone. They set the podium in a quiet conference room at the terminal. No dramatic backdrops, no logos plastered behind her. Just white walls, a single mic, and 3 rows of folding chairs filled with reporters who'd raced in after seeing the clip hit 1 million views. James stood off to the side, flanked by corporate reps. But it was Amara who stepped up to the mic. She wasn't in makeup. No stylist had touched her hair. She wore the same soft blue sweater she'd boarded in, now wrinkled from hours of tension and cradling her baby. She adjusted the mic herself. I wasn't planning to speak today, she began, her voice calm. Clear. I was planning to fly from New York to San Francisco with my infant son. Flashbulbs popped. I had paid for first class. I had earned it by saving, planning, and sacrificing like so many working mothers do. I wasn't looking for special treatment. I was looking for rest. She paused. And instead, I was slapped in front of a cabin full of people for the crime of being seen. Murmurs rippled through the press row. Let me be clear, she said, gaze steady. This isn't just about one flight attendant. It's not just about a slap. It's about the idea that certain spaces, luxury, peace, respect, are reserved for certain people. She let that hang. That I had to prove I belonged in first class. That it took a phone call to a CEO for anyone to listen. That until then, my pain was just inconvenient noise. A silence fell over the room. Amara leaned in slightly. But let's talk about noise. She placed her hand gently on her chest. My baby cried because he was tired. I was silenced because I was too much. And the people around me? They whispered, watched, judged, until power walked through the door and changed the script. Another pause. First class isn't about leather seats and champagne. It's about being treated like your presence isn't a mistake. Like your worth isn't on trial at 35,000 feet. She glanced to the side where James stood, his eyes locked on hers. And while I'm married to the CEO, today I speak not as his wife, but as every woman who's been asked to shrink herself to make others more comfortable. She stepped back from the mic, no more shrinking. The reporters didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They just sat, stunned, because some truths land louder than applause. Outside, the world was still reacting. But inside that room, Amara had done more than speak. She'd rewritten the altitude of accountability. The press conference video hit the internet before Amara even left the room. By the time she walked back into the executive lounge, her name was trending alongside phrases like black motherhood, corporate hypocrisy, and first-class racism. Cable news anchors dissected her speech in real time. Social media platforms buzzed with reaction videos. Influencers quoted her line. First class isn't about leather seats and champagne. It's about being treated like your presence isn't a mistake. The airline's PR team scrambled to catch up. Drafted statements were revised, tossed, rewritten again. But there was no spinning it now. The narrative wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to the public. And to her. Inside corporate headquarters, the internal temperature rose like, well, cabin pressure. Emails flew. HR initiated an emergency review of in-flight conduct policies. Flight crews across the country whispered nervously in crew lounges, asking one another, did you see the slap video? But more than that, something else had begun. Flight attendants of color, black women in particular, started emailing anonymously, sharing stories, naming names. This isn't new, they said. It just finally got caught on camera. Karen Morrison's name, already radioactive, began appearing in those messages. Turns out, Amara hadn't been her first target, just her last. One crew member's message stood out. I was written up for helping a black family get seated together. Karen told me they were probably economy upgrades anyway. That was 3 months ago. James read that email in his office, jaw tight, anger simmering just below the surface. He called the HR director. I want a full audit on every complaint tied to her name. Every crew she worked with. Every passenger incident. Go back 5 years. Meanwhile, Amara sat quietly beside a window, nursing her son, unaware of how far the storm had reached. She didn't want to be the face of a movement. But movements rarely wait for permission. 2 days later, the airline's executive board convened an emergency session. Glass walls, espresso machines, high-back chairs that made people feel important. But this time, the power dynamic had shifted. James sat at the head of the table, not just as CEO, but as a man who'd had to hold his crying wife after she'd been struck under his own company's logo. I don't want sympathy, he told them. I want structure. Some of the board members squirmed. They preferred action items, not personal reckoning. They wanted to bury the story in time and hope the public forgot. But James wasn't here to let them forget. We're not going to handle this the way airlines handle things, he continued. No weak statements. No retraining. This is not about damage control. This is about culture control. Silence. Then he clicked the remote. Behind him, a screen came to life with a pie chart, crew demographics, broken down by race, gender, seniority. The data was damning. 84% of our senior flight attendants are white, James said. Less than 6% are black. And guess which demographic is written up the most for attitude? or noncompliance? I'll give you a hint. It's not the people who look like Karen Morrison. A nervous chuckle died in someone's throat. He clicked again. Another screen. Quotes from internal complaints filed and ignored. She makes assumptions about who belongs where. She once asked if a black woman was on standby, in first class. Passengers have complained, but she talks her way out of it. James turned back to the room. This isn't about one incident. It's about what we've enabled. A board member finally spoke. We'll support disciplinary action, but a full audit might open us up to lawsuits. James leaned forward. Good. That means we're finally being honest. Another member asked, and what about Amara? If she wants a settlement, we should. James cut him off. Amara isn't suing. She doesn't want money. She wants systems that don't collapse when someone who looks like her takes a seat that others think she didn't earn. He stood, collecting his folder. This isn't just a PR crisis, he said. It's a moral inventory. And we're past due. Then he left the room. And this time, the silence he left behind was filled not with fear, but with accountability. The next time Amara boarded a plane, it wasn't in silence. It was 6 days after the incident. Gate C-37 was packed. Business travelers, families with strollers, couples in sandals headed to somewhere warmer. But as she approached the boarding area with her son in her arms, conversations started to hush. Eyes found her. And then, something unexpected happened. People stood, one by one. Not everyone, not all at once, but enough to form a ripple of quiet reverence. A woman in a Delta uniform near the gate gave a respectful nod. A man in coach reached out, wordlessly offering to help with her carry-on. A young Asian woman mouthed, "Thank you," as she passed. Amara was used to the stares, but not this kind. She reached the first-class line. This time, no one questioned her place. Yasmin, the junior flight attendant from that fateful flight, greeted her at the cabin door. She smiled wide, warm, genuine. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Brooks." Amara blinked. "You're still flying?" "Still here," Yasmin replied, pride tucked behind her voice. "Actually, I've been promoted to lead on this route." "Really? Turns out, telling the truth gets you noticed now." Amara stepped inside. The cabin was pristine. Soft lighting, fresh linens, a sense that the air itself had been recalibrated. She took her seat, and something in her, something bruised but not broken, finally allowed itself to exhale. The captain's voice came over the speaker. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Flight 247, nonstop to Los Angeles. Before we begin our safety announcements, I'd like to take a moment to recognize a very special passenger in Seat 2A. Mrs. Amara Brooks, your courage and voice have reminded us that integrity doesn't come from rank. It comes from doing what's right when no one's watching." A beat of silence followed. Then, soft applause. Then louder. Even the cabin crew clapped. Amara sat still. Tears welled, but didn't fall. Her son stirred against her shoulder. And for the first time in a week, she felt something closer to peace. Not because the world had changed, but because she had changed the world's direction, even just a few degrees. What started in first class didn't stay there. Within 2 weeks, 3 other major airlines announced overhauls to their crew conduct policies, clearly trying to avoid their own Amara moment. Industry insiders began referring to it as the Brooks Standard, the expectation that airline staff treat every passenger with dignity, regardless of how much they paid or what they looked like. Media outlets called it the first-class reckoning. But the ripple went further than the skies. Corporations across industries, hotels, luxury retailers, rideshare apps, held emergency inclusion briefings. Because what Amara had made impossible to ignore was that access doesn't erase bias. A black woman in a luxury space still had to prove she belonged there, even when she owned it by proxy. Universities discussed her case in business ethics classes. DI professionals used her speech in training modules. One professor uploaded her press conference with the title, "How a Mother in Seat 2A Changed Corporate America." And Amara? She stayed mostly quiet. She declined interview requests. She deleted her Twitter account. She turned down 3 talk shows and 2 book deals. Because for her, this wasn't about becoming a symbol. It was about surviving an injustice and choosing not to stay silent about it. James, too, kept his focus sharp. The audit into Karen Morrison's history uncovered more than they expected. Dozens of microaggressions, ignored complaints, even past settlements that had been quietly buried. A full internal investigation was made public. Employees took note. Silence would no longer be rewarded. And for the first time in years, James felt like the company wasn't just flying, it was rising. Meanwhile, in homes and offices around the world, Black mothers showed the video to their children. Girls saw Amara's calm resolve. Boys learned that crying on a plane shouldn't cost your mother her dignity. Amara had simply tried to fly with her baby. But now, she was clearing airspace for everyone else. 2 months later, Amara received a package. No sender listed, just the airline's gold foil logo embossed on the front. Inside, a custom-made leather case, soft as butter. And inside that, a single boarding pass. Not for a real flight, but a symbolic one. Passenger, Amara Brooks. Seat, 2A. Route, wherever you belong. Class, reserved. Underneath it was a handwritten note from James. Every seat you take is first class now, because you carry dignity with you, whether the world recognizes it or not. She smiled, letting her fingertips trace the boarding pass like it was a poem. In her home office, tucked between framed photos and baby blankets, she placed it inside a shadow box, right next to a news clipping of her speech and a printed tweet that read, "Amara Brooks didn't ask for a platform. They gave her a seat, and she turned it into a stage." She still hadn't returned to social media, but the world hadn't stopped talking. The airline's new slogan launched that week. Everyone belongs on board. It wasn't just marketing. They backed it with policy, accountability, and representation. Flight attendants now trained with bias response modules. Passengers could report microaggressions with a QR scan. Flight crews were diversified at every level. And in every aircraft, one small change was quietly implemented. Seat 2A on every long-haul flight now bore a stitched tag, reserved in honor of courage. Most passengers never noticed it. But those who did, they asked, they learned, they remembered. And slowly, a culture that had once gatekept dignity started making room. Not because of a policy, but because one woman refused to be moved. Months passed. The headlines faded. The hashtags cooled. The world, as it does, moved on. But change, real change, was still in motion. One afternoon, Amara sat alone in a quiet airport cafe, baby asleep in a stroller beside her. She sipped tea, glanced at the departure boards, and felt still. Not invisible, not exceptional, just still. A young woman approached, early 20s, nervous smile, airline badge clipped to her lanyard. "Excuse me," she said, clutching a boarding pass. "Are you Mrs. Brooks?" Amara turned. "I am." The woman lit up. "I'm in the cadet flight attendant program. They showed us your story during training. I just wanted to say thank you. You didn't know it, but you made space for people like me to rise without shrinking." Amara smiled, her voice gentle. "Thank you for saying that. And for rising." The young woman's voice cracked slightly. "I used to worry about smiling too much or sounding too assertive. But now I know, it's not me that needs changing. It's the air around me." Amara nodded. "Then keep breathing, and make room for others to do the same." They exchanged a quiet goodbye. As the woman walked away, Amara looked out the terminal window at the planes taxiing on the runway. Silver birds gliding across asphalt, built by systems that once ignored people like her. She didn't need to be in the sky to see how high she'd flown. Not because she fought for power, but because she held her ground with grace. Seat 2A would always carry her story. But the real legacy was how many others now dared to sit beside her. It happened during a routine flight to Seattle. An older white man in first class raised his voice at a young black mother, whose toddler had spilled juice on the armrest. The crew hesitated, momentarily frozen in the old instinct to appease the louder voice, not the vulnerable one. But then, the lead attendant stepped forward. She didn't scold the child. She didn't ask the mother to calm down. She turned to the man and said, with quiet authority, "Sir, we don't treat our passengers like that. Not anymore." The moment passed. No escalation. No viral video. Just accountability, applied in real time. That's how culture changes. Not always with grand speeches, but with quiet choices made when no one's watching. Back in New York, Amara stood in her son's nursery, rocking him gently as the evening light poured across the crib. He was older now, no longer the wailing infant who'd been born into turbulence. He giggled, tugging at the gold chain around her neck. She smiled, whispering into his ear, "You know, you once made a whole plane stop and listen." He giggled again. James leaned against the doorframe, watching them. "You ready to fly again?" he asked. Amara turned, thoughtful. "I think this time, I'll sit and coach." James raised an eyebrow. "Coach?" She smiled. "So someone else gets to see what first class looks like when they finally take their seat." They kissed. The baby cooed. And somewhere in the sky above them, flight attendants adjusted uniforms, passengers buckled in, and seat 2A waited, stitched with the memory of a woman who refused to be dismissed. Because she didn't just change a flight. She changed the altitude of what we all expect from the world. Dignity, belonging, and the space to cry without apology. That's the story of first class, and the woman who made it hers. Thank you for watching. Subscribe me and hit the notification bell to not miss new stories. Bye.